Hi, everyone. Welcome to Women in Film, a conversation with Stephanie Allain. I am Suckarie, Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at Cast and Crew, and I am so honored to have Stephanie here. She is a producer in film and television, and you may know her from Hustle and Flow, Dear White People, and she also produced the Oscars. On top of that, she is a beloved board member here at Cast and Crew. So please join me in welcoming Stephanie Allain.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, Lauren.
Thank you for being here. We are so excited to have you. I am super excited to jump into this conversation with you. And I could spend an hour, running off your resume to everyone, but I really want this conversation to be an opportunity for you to just truly, talk about your journey, not only as a woman in film, but also as an African-American woman in film. So, let's jump right into it if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So in the spirit of what we're here to celebrate, I would love to start off by asking, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you, Stephanie?
Thank you for that. So DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to me means, I break it down. So diversity for me means whatever the table is, has to be an array of folks. It cannot be homogenous. It has to have an array of genders, of races, of ethnicities, whatever that makeup is of our audience, that's what that room has to look like. That's diversity. The second thing is equity. And that means that those folks have to be paid the same, right? That the contemporaries who are white, cis, male, they have to be paid the same as the Black females, right? So equity means that it's equitable, like what they're being paid. And the third thing, inclusion means, yeah, they can be at the table, but are they window dressing? Yeah, they can be at the table and they're being paid the same, but does their voice count? So that's what inclusion means to me. Inclusion means that if you're at that table, your voice has the same weight as somebody else's voice regarding the outcome of whatever it is you're discussing.
Yeah, I love the way that you broke that down. Great explanation. And with that said, how do you feel that the recent spotlight on DEI has shifted the landscape of the film industry? How has the industry evolved in your eyes?
Yeah, so I've been here a long time, since 1990. That was my first real job in the business. And I will say, people complain, progress is slow. It is, but that arc, that long arc toward justice, it's real. Things have changed. And you can look at the array of content that we see, things from Lena Waithe or things from Ava, like there's definitely more content. And yes, it has ebbed and flowed over the years. Like in the 90s, things were good. There were many, many Black movies being released from major studios. There was a lot of Black television. And then it sort of went away. And now it's back. And the difference is it's back not just as gangsters or comedy or, men in fat suits as women, but the array of product, the array of content that we see now is so diverse in and of itself. Black people are not a monolith. We know that. And so to me, you can see that long arc toward justice just in the content itself and in the folks who are being paid at studios to have deals. So yeah, it's changed a lot. And I think this conversation about what is diversity, what is equity, what is inclusion have really pushed the conversation forward and pushed the reality of what we see on the ground forward.
No, and it's so important and so needed. I'm so happy to hear that too, from your perspective. So with that said, that brings me to my next question. What does it mean to be a Black woman in film today? Based on everything that you said, like how does it feel in this moment?
It feels the same it's always felt, I mean, I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman. There's always the fight. Yeah. To be honest, there's always the struggle. There's always the explaining why it's important to me or explaining why I think it will connect to other people. but I was so blessed because I learned on my very, very first movie, which was Boys in the Hood, that the more specific the story, the more universal it is. And so, we made that movie for $5 million. It made $65 million here domestically, was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. That was about a small community in South Central that was making headlines, but nobody knew who these people were. Nobody knew the faces of these boys until we made that movie. And then not just the audience that we knew would come out, right? The young folks, Black folks, people, fans of Ice Cube or whatever, but I got calls from like middle-aged white women in Iowa going, oh my God, I didn't know about this. I didn't know that these were people, they were stats before. And so the power of specificity to change culture, to change minds, to change hearts is very real.
Oh, yeah. And the power of storytelling from that perspective too.
Absolutely.
That's actually one of my favorite movies. So I do have a follow-up question. So I'm so glad that you jumped into that topic because I can't wait to talk to you a little bit further about Boys in the Hood. But if we can kind of take it back to the early days, because I know you shared with me that you're from New Orleans. I'm from Houston. So I was like, oh my God, the food and the culture within New Orleans is amazing. But, you shared with me that your family is from New Orleans, but you were raised in Los Angeles.
Right.
Are you able to tell us a little bit about your family? Like how does your culture, and where you're from and where your family is from, has that shaped you in any way, or how has it shaped you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I come from a long line of Creole matriarchs. My mom and my dad both from New Orleans. My mom's an educator. My dad was a biochemist. Education was super important. Arts, not so much. Like really, they were like, go to school. I was pre-law, in fact, when I first went to USC. But there was always this home vibe. It was always, my grandmother and my great-grandmother lived in the same shotgun house. So when I was growing up, even though I grew up in LA, every summer I spent in New Orleans at that house, which we still have. And it was food, it was family, it was guests, it was just this Southern hospitality. I think that's the best way to describe it. And I learned how important it was to make people feel good at your house. Like if you're the host, you're in charge. And I think that really plays into how I produce. Like that's how I feel as a producer. Like I'm welcoming you to my house. I want to make sure you're good. I make sure you have what you need to do whatever it is you need to do. So that, it's the food, it's the gumbo, it's just feeling good, having a good time. Like, I think that was really what I watched, what I saw with my own family, and what was communicated to me that was really important. Like hospitality is super important. Making people feel warmed and welcomed and fed and loved, I think is just sort of in my bones.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, even in our conversations, you've always done an amazing job of making not only me, but everyone that you've interacted with that I've seen just feel so welcome and like we have everything that we need. So I love that. And I can tell that that's where you got that from. So thank you. I appreciate that so much. Okay, well, fast forwarding back into your career in the 90s. So before you started Boys in the Hood, you were a studio exec at Columbia Pictures. So what was life like for you then? And what was it like being a female studio exec at that time?
Well, I'm going to jump back a little bit before that because I didn't just show up as a studio exec. So I got my degree in literature and writing. I loved reading. I love stories. I did. They just transported me from wherever I was into a new world. And early on, I saw the connection between books and films.
Yeah.
Because I never read a script. I didn't know scripts existed, but books I did know existed. And so the first two books that really transformed the way I sort of thought about film was The Exorcist and The Godfather. And these are two books that I read, and then I snuck into the theaters because I was too young to get in because they were already movies. I used to hang out outside the theaters with my $5 and wait for like a nice looking adult to pass and like, would you buy me a ticket? That connection just really blew my mind because I'd already seen the movie in my head from reading the book. Then I saw the adaptation, like somebody else's version of what was on the page. And I realized, wow, there's something that happens to make choices about what's on the screen. I just filed it away. I didn't know anybody in the movie business. I didn't know how it worked. I thought I was going to be a writer. I was still listening to my parents thinking I had to be a lawyer or some other kind of profession. And so I was at USC. I dropped out of school and moved to Hawaii because I didn't know what I wanted to do, which was amazing.
I love that.
Yeah. That was in my sophomore year. And then I realized I really did want to write. I realized I had to apply myself. So I applied to the writing program at UC Santa Cruz. I got in. And there I really was immersed in a group of artists creating things. I was on the radio show where we'd write these short radio plays and then perform them. We did plays. I was a dancer. Like my whole world, like as a creative being, as an artist, sort of started to blossom. Yeah. So much so that when I graduated, I thought, hey, you know what? I went to Cal Arts as a dancer because I had this fantasy I was going to be a dancer. It didn't last long because I wanted to make money. And I knew that dancing was probably not going to do that. And then after I graduated, I got pregnant. I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with this baby? And there was one thing I could do, and that was read. It was so easy to read. Like reading was so easy. And then I found out there was a job called reader. I was like, that's for me, that job. So I asked around, I hunted and pecked until I finally found a job at CAA, Creative Artists Agency, which was and still is probably, the big three agents in Hollywood. And that's where my real education started as a reader, because I read for a couple of years, books, screenplays, and then you have to write coverage, which is what's the synopsis? And do you think it'll make a good adaptation for screen? And I read, this is back in the days when there were no computers. This was typewriters. This was, you just had to go right from reading it to typing it up. And that was my real education, because I began to synthesize stories. I began to understand that, by page 13 or 15, something needs to happen. I knew that by page 25 or 30, a new world had to open up. Like the character had to go on a journey. It just literally, from reading and writing these synopses, I understood the form.
Right.
And then I realized this was actually a real job, like being a reader. So after I worked at CAA, I got a job as the story analyst. It's a union job at Fox. And this was like the easiest job in the world. It was like left alone all day. You had 5 scripts to read over the course of a week. It was like business. And the pay was amazing. It's like $50,000. I was like, oh my God, I've made it. And then I realized, and I emphasize these steps because I think it's really important. I think people think about being a studio executive. How do you get there? Like, it's unimaginable. How do people get those jobs? It's one step at a time, right? So I was a reader. I realized that there was a job called story analyst. I got that job. Then I realized that there were all these people I was writing coverage for, the executives, who obviously weren't really reading the scripts. Like I was reading them and giving them coverage. So I was like, well, I should do that job because I'm doing it. Right. And so there was an opening. At the time, Dawn Steele was running Columbia Pictures. I was at Columbia by this time. I'd sort of moved around as a story analyst. And I went in to get that job. Amy Pascal was also there. I consider her a real mentor because she really brought me into the room where it happens, like when she was talking to writers about the script or talking to the directors. I was sitting there taking notes. She was probably using some of my notes from, my reading of the script. And so that was my first real job. I was so proud. I was in the big house. And this is so long ago. This is when Columbia shared the lot with Warner Brothers in Burbank. So this is a long, long time ago. And once in there, I was at the table. That's when I was at the table. So I realized quickly that, of course, I was the only, Black person there. I think there was one other Black exec there who sort of left soon, and the assignment every weekend on Friday was called Weekend Read. And at Weekend Read, everybody got assigned different scripts to read. Well, I love reading. So one day I came in and Dawn Steele said, well, what did you think, Sal? And I was like, oh, that wasn't my script. That didn't have my name on it. I didn't read that. And I saw her just look at me like, okay, all right. And so after that, I read everything on the list. It had my name on it, didn't have my name on it. It didn't matter. I was going to outread everybody. And that's exactly what I did. So pretty soon I started to know who the good writers were. If somebody was talking about the script, I'd pipe up. Oh, well, what about this? I think this. And it became clear that my work ethic was kind of off the chart. Like that's the one thing I could do, which I love to do, reading. And then also my assignment was to find new material. I started to, because I was the only person of color in the reading department where I was promoted from, I wanted to replace myself with somebody who was Black. And I'd heard about this young kid still at USC named John Singleton, who allegedly wanted that job. So I brought him into my office and interviewed him, but he couldn't care less about that job. All he wanted to talk about was this script he'd written called Boys in the Hood. Boys in the Hood, this and that, this and that. So finally I was like, well, I really want to read it. He was like, no, I'm doing it with John Hughes. It's going to be this big thing. I was like, okay, whatever. Finally, I broke through and I got that script. I remember this so clearly. I sat in my office. I turned the last page. I was crying. And I was like, this is my aha moment. Like, this is why I'm here. It was so clear to me. I realized I had to get that movie made. And I was uniquely positioned because I went to school in Inglewood. I knew these kids. I knew them. I grew up with them. So I just made it my business to go to every single executive who was sitting at the table with me, ask them personally to read it, explain why I thought it was important. And that's what I did. And in the meantime, we got sold to Sony because Coca-Cola owned the company then. And we moved, John Peters and Peter Gruber came in and we moved to Culver City. And by the time we did that move, which is probably a month or two, everybody at the table had read it. And so I walked into the Weekend Read confident that everybody was going to support me, and nobody did. It was like, oh, then I realized, oh, the politics, like this is a whole nother world. But luckily, Amy supported me, and Frank Price, who was then running the studio, loved the script. I brought John in. John was like, I'm not going to sell it. I have to direct it. John had directed a music video at college that was terrible. He showed it to me. I was like, we are not showing this to anybody. Oh God, no, we're just going to say you're doing it. That's it. And so that's what we did. And that was the bedrock of my career, the start of my career, of who I am as a producer. John really taught me to protect the artist's vision and to fight for authenticity, and kind of the rest is history. It just took off. His career took off, my career took off, and we worked together. We made 5 movies together. He was the best.
And how did it feel after, because I know I shared with you when I put on Boys in the Hood the other night, and I said these waves of emotions just came over me, and I literally had to turn it off because I was not ready to fully feel, which I know you have, like Boys in the Hood can just bring out so much. So when you saw how the world responded to Boys in the Hood, how did that make you feel, knowing that you believed in this project that much, and John, of course? So how did it make you feel?
Validated. I felt like my gut instinct was right. And that was so important, which I've relied on so much throughout my career. Like, it doesn't matter what anybody else says. If you have a gut instinct, if you have a feeling, if you have a passion, if you have a love for something, then don't let anybody stop you. Don't take no. Just keep going. Let those no's be fuel. Let those no's be, I will prove you wrong. I will get this made. I will show you that it's worthy. I will show you that it's commercial. I will show you that it can make money. I will show you that it can change culture. And how lucky was I that was my first movie? That was my very first movie. I learned that on my first movie. So I am eternally grateful to John, and you miss him a lot.
That's divine order. And thank you so much for sharing that. And also thank you so much for backtracking and talking about your journey in terms of how you started, and even sharing the fact that you went to Hawaii and came back, because there's so many people in this world, that don't even know where to start. So by you sharing that in itself, I can see that inspiring so many individuals and helping them to know, just get started. So to kind of jump back into the questions, so you were at Columbia Pictures for a decade, and you had a hand in supervising films such as Poetic Justice, El Mariachi, Desperado, and Higher Learning. As these are iconic pieces of work, is there anything specifically that you would like to share about your experiences working on any of these films? I know I love Poetic Justice specifically, but all of them are amazing films. So if there's anything that you would like to share.
Sure. I mean, after Boys in the Hood, John was pretty untouchable. Like, he was all over all the newspapers. He could do pretty much what he wanted. So working on Poetic Justice with Janet and Tupac was super fun. We shot that right during the uprising in 93, 94, when Rodney King was beat down, and it was, the whole city was on fire. The whole city was on fire, and we were shooting. In fact, if you look at that movie, when they're driving in the truck, you'll see all the burned down buildings and things. It was very much, Maya Angelou was on that movie. Oh my God, I sat at her feet and listened to her just wax poetic about life and love and art. It was pretty special. And Robert was really interesting too, because after Boys in the Hood, I sort of had this patina of like kingmaker, like, oh, she can take somebody from nowhere and, bring them to the world. And so I was turned on to Robert. The first movie he made, El Mariachi, which was like on a VHS tape, all in Spanish. I know Spanish, so I watched it. I watched it with my family, actually, and I was like, this is good. Like, you don't even need to understand the language, because visually he was telling the story. So I flew down to Austin, where he lived, and took out his entire family, which is huge. And I said, yeah, come make this movie with us. What should we do? And we decided we were going to remake that movie, not remake it, but upgrade it, So we spent, I don't know, several $100,000 on the sound, which is really bad. And we released it. And remember, at the time, Peter Guber was such a marketing whiz. It was like, it's the $7,000 studio movie. And so that's what we did. And Robert was a savant. He could write, he could direct, he could shoot, he could edit, he could make music. He did everything. He was a full one-stop shop. And I think because I worked with John, that was like, he was like, yeah, I want on that ship, Yeah. And then I could also talk about, being a mother, like during all this time, because I had my first son, but was very young. I was juggling being a mother, being a wife, and this burgeoning career that, was so demanding. People don't realize, like now because of COVID, but before it was like breakfast, lunch, dinners. Like that was how you made your way, because it's all about people. It's all about connections. Yeah. So that was a struggle, to be honest, like how to manage my time. I was lucky because my mom lived really close. Oh my God, she helped me so much. Could not do it without my mother. And toward the end of that time, I met Darnell Martin, who was a young Black, half Puerto Rican woman. She had a script called I Like It Like That, which I loved. Was a love story. Was super hard. Like even after, and this is something I contend with even today, like even after all the success of probably 8-9 years at the studio, where every single movie that I supervised made money because the budgets were so low. When I said I want this Black woman to direct her movie, it was still a struggle. You know, I had to literally beg them to make this movie. So that's the part of the long arc that when you're in it feels very, very slow, you know. But we got it made. It went to Cannes. It's a really sweet little movie, launched her career. And by then, though, I was like 10 years in, and I thought, wow, my personal life, like I wanted to have another child. I didn't want to have a single child. And so my husband, who I eventually married, we got pregnant, and then I was like, I don't want to do the studio thing anymore. It's the sapping my time and my energy. And I also felt like I wanted to get closer to the creative process. You know, when I started my career, I wanted to write, like that's what I wanted to do. There was like no time for that. So, so then I looked for a new job, and that's when I got the job running Jim Henson Pictures. And that was like the second real chapter in my story, where I was trying to get closer to the creative process, and I got further away because as the president, I was in charge of business affairs, I was in charge of marketing, I was in charge of development. Like I had a staff of 20 people. It was so much managing. And I thought, because I was pregnant again, and I, wanted to do something that my kids could relate to.
Yeah.
Complete disaster. I was eventually fired. I learned so much during that 5-year period. I had Kermit singing Brick House. I had kids running from the exit watching Elmo and Grouchland because Mandy Patinkin was a seriously scary villain. It was a comedy of errors, to be honest with you. My marriage broke up, just everything sort of imploded on that job in that period of time. But I did learn really great lessons. And the first one is failure is okay. You know what I mean? Like failure, you learn the most from failure. So when things are good and you're just kind of gliding on, you don't really take stock of what's making you successful. Right. But when you fail, you have to. And so failure really opened my eyes to what I was doing, why I was doing it, what I wanted, how I could be better at my job. And the other thing I really learned from working at the Henson Company was preparation, because in order to shoot with puppets, you need to bring the right puppet arms. You need to bring the right puppet head. Like
you've never even thought of, right?
Never thought of it. So that was and then after that, I was 40 and I was like, I got to get off this wheel. I don't know what I am or what I'm doing. I was fired. I got paid out, which was nice. And so I just started doing the things I loved again, which is dance. I went back to dance class. My oldest son was 16. He and I were doing hip hop together at the clubs, not the clubs, but the dance studios. And I was cooking. My youngest son was 6. I had 10 years between them. It was a really great time. It was a really great time just to realize that Hollywood wasn't everything and that I could step away from it. And it wasn't like, sure, the water closed over. I was off here like doing whatever, but it was kind of like double Dutch. Like after a few months of that, I was like, okay, I'm bored. I need to get back to work. And so I just sort of double Dutch back in. And that's when somebody approached me, Erwin Stoff approached me. Did I want to go work at 3 Arts, which is a big management company? I was like, sure, why not? And it was there that I read Hustle and Flow. And I had that same feeling when I read Boys in the Hood. Like my heart started beating fast. I was like, oh my God, I can see this. I can hear the music. There wasn't even any music in the script, but I could hear it. It was that well written. So I flew to Memphis and I met Craig Brewer and I was like, let's do this. It took us 4 years.
I'm sorry. And by then you had already launched your own production studio, Homegrown Pictures, correct?
Well, it was during this time where I thought I had this really big house and I was like, I didn't care. I didn't want it. I didn't need it. You know, I wanted to make this movie. And so I sold my house because this was the launch of digital filmmaking. And you could actually make a movie for a couple $100,000, like which had never happened before because film was so expensive and all the equipment. So I sold my house and I thought, we're going to go make this movie. We're going to own it. We're going to sell it. It's going to be great. And we hired, you know, we got Terrence Howard. We started putting it together at Taraji, but it didn't really happen. And I happened to be visiting John Singleton on the set of Fast and Furious. And I told him about the script and I sent him the script and he called me 2 months later and he says, I said, look, you put in 250, I'll put in 250. We'll go make this movie, it'll be great. He called me back and he said, no way. There's no way. I'm going to get $8 million. This is a great movie. This is so fun, so cool. And it took us like, I don't know, 2 more years shopping it, looking for money. John was pissed because he had just made Fast and Furious. By then it had made $300 million. Every movie he had made money. And he couldn't get $8 million to make this movie. So then he just said, you know what? I'm just going to take out my checkbook and we're just going to go do it. And that's what we did. We went to Memphis for one hot month in July, and we shot the movie in 4 weeks and took it to Sundance. And everybody who passed, years and years of passing, they all wanted the movie, and we sold it for a lot of money. And that was the second time where I was really happy that I had stuck with my gut, because people wanted us, they didn't want to make the movie with Terrence Howard. They wanted to make the movie with a rapper. But we knew it was Terrence's movie. We like it. It's Terrence's movie, you know. And then he got nominated for an Oscar, you know, for the first time. So again, it's just like if you believe in something, then you're the maker of that reality. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that was answering the question, but.
No, you answered it and more. I'm just listening to you in awe, you know, as a parent, as a woman. I truly appreciate, and I'm sure I can speak for everyone that you know is listening. You know, we appreciate your level of transparency because your story is just such an inspiration to us all. And I love that. Trusting your gut. It's all about trusting your gut, and you know, you trusting your gut has paid off in such an amazing way. So thank you for sharing that. So from 2011 to 2016, you served as director of the LA Film Festival. You know, and can you talk about a little bit what you were able to accomplish as director? Because I heard that you did some amazing things with the film festival.
So since the start of my career with Boys in the Hood, I have been sort of a go-to person for DEI. I was on the board of Film Independent, which is an amazing nonprofit organization that supports independent filmmakers. And the director of the festival had to leave. And I hadn't been, this was, you said 2011. Yeah. So it had been sort of a rough period after I had made Hustle and Flow and Something New, which was like one of my favorite movies I've made because it was kind of my story. My first husband was white. And that love affair was very profound and significant for me. By the way, it's available on HBO Max. I just saw it's back. It's back in circulation. So I forgot the question.
No, it's so I was.
Oh, I know. So the festival. So I was like, raised my hand, and this is another thing I think it's really important, which is don't be scared. Like just because you haven't done something doesn't mean you can't do it. And by stepping out on that plank, you'll find out how much you actually know already, right? So I raised my hand. I said, I can do that. I can run the festival. Then I got in and they were like, great. Oh, it's so great. And I was like, great. So then I got in and I realized that the organization, the tagline was like diversity in bringing diversity to Hollywood or something. And then I went in there and I was like, wait a minute, the entire staff is white. How is this diverse? And the movies that we're picking, the movies that they're programming were, some of them were Black, but by white filmmakers,
right,
using Black bodies. I was like, well, that's not what we do. That doesn't seem right. So I started, and I didn't really know about programming and like the whole, it's like, it's by the way, film festival staffs and organizations, that's like that's a movie waiting to happen because there's so much drama there. But anyway, I got in and I started to think this isn't right. Like, how do we bring DEI to this process? And so I started asking around. I found an amazing programmer, Roy Rastegar, who was a PhD under Angela Davis. And she had this whole philosophy about how to do it, you know, because people say, oh, we don't care about that. We just want the best movies. You know what I mean? We just want the best movies. Well, we all know we all have cultural bias. So for me, the best movies tend to be movies that are Black or tend to be movies that feature women, because that's what I like, right? And so the best isn't the best. The best is just the best of a certain bias, right? And so she taught me that what we needed to do was have these buckets. So we'd have like, we put all the films with, you know, Black filmmakers in one bucket. We put all the films with female filmmakers. We put all the films with gay filmmakers. And then we picked the best of those. Then all of a sudden, we had this beautiful array of very interesting and very diverse films. And they were the best, you know? And so, and it's also coincided with Netflix and Amazon really coming into the streamer business, looking for content. We sold more films, and like the LA Film Festival wasn't known as a festival that sold films. It was more like a festival that sort of brought all the other festival movies together for the LA audience. So I decided I wanted the festival to be super diverse, and I wanted it to be LA focused because these were LA filmmakers. And that's to me what I thought as film independent producing this event should focus on. We were the first folks to sort of quantify the stats on how many films were by women, how many films were by people of color. People didn't even want to do that. And I remember there was even an article saying, why is she doing that? That's, you know,
that's important.
Now, of course, everybody does it. But it was a great period for me. It was a really great period. I learned a lot. I had to interface with the studio heads at all the studios because part of my job was to underwrite the festival through inclusion of big studio films as our openings or closings or whatever. They would pay for the parties, and you know, it was a heavy sponsor. You know, had to like go to Delta, go to Hertz or whatever. Like it put me in a different sphere of influence, to be honest. And out of that, I started, because I had so much publicity, I started to get calls. Filmmakers that I'd known and worked with, like Gina Prince Bythewood, called me up and said, would you produce my movie? I basically got so busy, I had to leave.
Awesome. And some of those things that you spoke of in regards to the film festival, as far as DEI goes, like that's what drives your mission for Homegrown, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm gonna make what turns me on, what I'm passionate about, which is stories from underrepresented groups. Like there's so many stories to tell, and they're human stories, you know? I mean, Boys in the Hood is basically a coming of age story about like two best friends, where like one takes one route, one takes the other, you know? There's always a way to connect our stories to the larger world just by being honest, authentic, and specific. So that's what Homegrown does. Homegrown is into smashing stereotypes, smashing stereotypes. The film industry is so profoundly connected to the way people see the world. And that's a global thing because, our films travel. And we all know that Birth of a Nation really, energized the Ku Klux Klan. It's just, it through stereotypes, right? And so if Homegrown can create content that starts to dispel stereotypes, that starts to open people's hearts and minds to who we are as women, as people, as Black people, then I will have done my job.
And you were doing your job. I absolutely love it. Thank you. So in 2020, you became the first African-American woman to produce the Academy Awards. And as a result, you were nominated for an Emmy. What did that moment mean to you? Because this is a different, you've done so many amazing things and now it's like, oh my gosh, so how did that feel to you?
Well, first of all, I was on the many committees at the Academy. I became a member in 2010, and I just spent a lot of time at those tables, So Lynette Howell Taylor called me, and she already had the job producing. She said, "Do you want to join me?" And I thought, "Oh my God, yes, of course I do." I knew nothing about live television. Nothing at all. And so again, it was this big leap into the abyss of the unknown. And I learned so much. I have to say, it's probably the most fun I've ever had in my life producing. It was exciting. It was high energy. It was disappointing. It was elating. Like, it was just everything. And like the pressure in the eyeballs was just, wow, it was pretty big. And, again, I was like, this has to be inclusive. Like, the Academy is the representation of the artists who make movies. And so we decided we were going to invite Janelle Monáe to open the show.
Love it.
That was super fun working with her and her whole team, and like that whole beautiful opening she did. I mean, that was great. We got Eminem to come back and play Lose Yourself, which he hadn't done when he won, his award. He had to keep it a big secret. It was like, I was just, where Elton John did his. It was. We had Utkarsh who like came in the middle and rapped out, like freestyle, like what had happened already. We had Questlove, who was our DJ. Like, it was just fun. It was just fun. And then the cherry on top was we got nominated for an Emmy. So that was cool too.
Well, I can't wait until you produce the next one, because it was amazing. I remember watching it, and I absolutely love Questlove amongst the other individuals that you spoke of. So that's so awesome. Thank you. And also, this specific topic I'm super excited about because I do have two girls, and I know that you have a children's book coming out. So can you tell us about that? And just know I will be the first one to purchase some copies, because
I'm so excited. So during the pandemic, again, this is like, what can you do with what you have? So during the pandemic, I was blessed to become a grandmother. My oldest son, Wade, who is also a writer, director, actor. He's Derek on Insecure. He writes and directs for, what did he do? Grownish. He's done a bunch of stuff. He's made his own movie with his brother. They both co-directed French Dirty, which was on Netflix. I think it's on Amazon now. Our whole household is just very creative. But anyway, during the pandemic, this new little baby, Kiala, showed up, and I was in their bubble because, remember, at the beginning, she was born literally April 2020. So at the beginning, we were all so scared, didn't want anybody near. So I was in their bubble. And one of the things I noticed was that because she was so sheltered, like, when you have a newborn baby, people are like, oh, da, 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 and ticky, 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 and all this stuff. Nobody can do that. So when we brought her out into the world a year later, when people would go up to her, she would pull back. Like, she knew her boundaries. And I thought, wow, there's no book that reinforces body agency for toddlers. That was just like, bing, that just went off in my mind. And so I have a best friend from college who has worked on and off for me as a reader, and we've created a bunch of theater things together. And I was talking to her, and she was like, "Yeah, that's a good idea." And it just like the book just came to us like full bore. It was done, and I thought, "Oh, well, what am I going to do with this?" She said, "Give it to your agent, give it to your agent." And I was like, they think I'm a producer. I don't know. It's just like, just do it. So I was like, bing, I pressed send. Within an hour, my agent said, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And I was like, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, there's no money in it. Don't even, like nothing. There's nothing." I was like, well, whatever. She goes, "But we'll send it to our our children's book person." He called us back in 2 hours later and said, "I love this. I love this. I'm going to, we had a book auction. 3 huge publishers wanted it. We sold it to the best publisher. We just hired an illustrator, and it's going to be out next year." And now we have like 3 other books that we've written. Like, it's just,
my gosh.
it's super fun because it's not something we really work at. It's just something we play at, and I think that sort of playful energy is buoyant, and just being around my grandchild and, just seeing what excites her and what she's into, it just opened up this whole new world and income stream. So I'm super excited when that comes out. And then, I went to school for writing, but I was a closet writer for years. Like, I would write scripts, I'd put them away, and then I'd find some new person and make them a star. And then, I finally realized when I turned 50, I was like, well, I'm halfway through this life. If I'm lucky, why can't I do what my passion is? And so I pulled out my scripts and I polished them up and I gave them to my agents, and they were like, "These aren't bad. These are pretty good. Let me send them out." I started having meetings as a writer. I was like, "Oh, wow, like this is great." And so I just finished co-writing a script with Cheo Hadari Coker, who's an amazing screenwriter and showrunner for TriStar. I'm about to turn in another script that I wrote to Endeavor Content, where I have my deal. I mean, it's like, there's always room for new growth, and I think that it's fear that really keeps us bound to our own little boxes, right? And so I would just say to anybody watching, do what is in your heart, take that leap, risk failure, risk rejection, because you never know. Like, what you have and what you've been working on could be so profoundly connected to somebody else. And so that part of my journey has really been to sort of step into my joy, really. Right. And out of that joy has come so much, like, yes, financial, but just the feeling, like how I feel when I finished writing something, like that's priceless, So yes, I have my book writing career. I'm reviving my screenwriting career. I'm probably going to direct before this is all over. You know what I mean? So which scares me to death. Like, I'm still at that place where, like, oh no, not me. But like, I've sat next to so many directors. Like, I know I can direct, but I haven't quite stepped up into that. But see, that's something to look forward to.
I love that you're constantly shattering your own glass ceiling, so to speak. Like, you're always ready for a new challenge, and with every new phase of life, you're stepping into a new chapter and trying something new. That's so inspiring. And that's something that I try to do in my own life. Like, if you're not challenging yourself, how are you growing?
That's right. That's right.
So much for that. So I did want to ask you if you could, so we got a lot of great questions that were submitted for this interview.
Oh, great.
I'm excited to ask you. But are there any 3 lessons specifically that you have learned along the way that you wish that you knew when you first started out? And it doesn't have to be 3, it could be 1.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is to really know yourself, to really know what you're passionate about. That's the first thing. Like, if you're going to pay $20 to go to a movie, which movie is that going to be? Like, that's a good indication of really what you really like. Once you know that, the second thing is become an expert at it, right? So if it's rom-coms, then just go back to Ernst Lubitsch and Frank Capra and just become an expert. Watch all of them. Know what the genre is. Know what the tropes are. Know what the form is, right? Become an expert at it. Once you know who you are and you become an expert at that passion, you're going to be valuable. You're going to be able to, walk into any room and say, oh yeah, the top 5 rom-com writers are A, B, C, D, and E. The top directors are these people. Like, that's what people pay for, So I would say that. I would say also, fear's good, step into the fear, because on the other side of that is, the holy grail. Like, that's where you really want to go. Being safe feels secure, but eventually it will wither, it'll be too familiar, it'll be too safe, and you'll have spent a lot of time like sort of look like imagining what's on the other side of that fence instead of knocking it down and seeing what's on the other side of the fence. And what else can I tell you? Like, don't forget life. Like, make-believe world is super fun and it's great, but at the end of the day, you got to go home. And who are you going home to? So I would say make time in your personal life, put that kind of energy and that creativity into where you live and the people that you love and the people you live with. Because, it's not all going to work out. And you definitely need to be happy just being who you are.
I love that. I always tell myself fear and comfort don't live on the same block. That's the quote that
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Stephanie, I could literally sit here and talk to you all day and soak in all this
fun.
knowledge and listen to your stories. But I know we have a certain amount of time. So I just wanted to thank you so much for such a great interview today. Thank you for being so transparent and honest, which I didn't expect anything less, but it just means the world to me. And I know anyone that is watching this interview, I know that they'll take all of this in and it'll be used to inspire and help others to succeed and grow just in the same way that you have. So, on the behalf of myself and the entire cast and crew family, I just want to say thank you so much for being here today for this interview. And if you have any closing thoughts, of course, you have the floor, but thank you.
Oh, thank you, Lauren. No, it's been lovely sitting here, and I love cast and crew. Like, I have to say, when I was approached to be a board member, the one thing I kept saying was, they're so human. Like, if I have a problem, I pick up a phone, I call somebody, they answer, it's so great. So I'm proud to be on the board and proud to share my story. And, just to everybody out there, just do you. Just do you.